What's up guys, Crazy here, back into Borderlands, and today we're going to go over the takedown at Maliwan's black site. This is currently by far the most challenging piece of content currently in Borderlands. It's extremely unforgiving, it requires a lot of team coordination, but it is also very rewarding, especially on Mayhem 4, and I've completed it on Mayhem 4 several times. Other people did it as well, so in today's video we are going to go over some of the best tips and tricks that you should all probably keep in mind if you also want to take it on the highest challenge, but it should also work on the lower challenges as well, and it should help you out with everything else in terms of takedowns. So let's jump in it, and if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would be super appreciated. Anyway, before even jumping into takedown, you have to keep in mind the fact that it is very difficult, the enemies are really hard to take on, and they deal a ton of damage. As such, you will have to pretty much be best in slot equipped for your current character as well as build, and this doesn't just include having all legendary equipment, but also having the best possible rolls on that equipment as well. In my case, for example, I'm running with a Mo's splash damage build, and most of the items, including the anointed effects, give me splash damage, which means that I can take a lot of enemies with AoE explosions, so definitely go with something that benefits that certain build that you're using. And there's two characters currently in the takedowns that fare very well. These are of course the Mo's build that I was talking about, as well as Amara's elemental build. These two are extremely powerful, but you can pretty much complete this with any of the other characters, though don't stack like 4 flags or anything, otherwise you're not going to fare very well. But yeah, especially on Mayhem 4, where the modifiers are about 1000% for the enemy HP and shields, you're going to want to have as much damage as possible and still survive the incoming damage, because the damage is also tremendously increased, and even I died several times on a Mo's that has about 35,000 shield, so it is absolutely insane. The next tip on the list is also something that you should be taking into account before jumping into the takedown, and it is of course to pay close attention to your Mayhem modifier. I know this sounds cheesy, but try to avoid anything that reads enemy explosions have greater area of effect or enemies have 40% weapon damage. The reason for that is mainly because most of the incoming damage is going to be AoE damage in the takedown, so if the enemies also get the bonus on top of the bonus they already have, you're going to have a pretty bad time. So try to avoid these as much as possible. Go with pre-made groups, and if you can avoid these, reconnect and rejoin the party or rejoin the takedown, and try aiming for literally any other modifiers, since the rest are pretty manageable. But this brings us to the third tip on the list, and that is of course dealing damage to the enemy. There's two elementals that you need to bring with yourself in the takedown if you want to have greater success, and these are the shock and the corrosive damage, with an additional cryo that I'm going to explain in just a little bit. But obviously the most important of them all are going to be the shock and the corrosive elemental damage, since with the exception of very few enemies in the beginning of the takedown, everything else is going to have at least shields, and many of the more tougher enemies, especially the robotic ones, are also going to have armor. So you're going to want that shock damage to take down the shields and the corrosive damage to take down the armor. This includes of course the robotic death balls, which are really menacing, the war dogs, which are also pretty much mechanical, and also the bosses. All of the bosses over here, including the mini bosses, are going to have both shields as well as armors, so try to stack that as much as possible. Now, as far as cryo damage goes, since I was talking about this brings us to the next tip on the list, and that is of course to bring in as much enemy CC and disruption as possible. And cryo is also included on the list, especially since it's so potent at the very least slowing down enemies, and in many cases even freezing them into place. And as a matter of fact, one of the first runs that I had, we used cryo damage, and it was extremely successful against most of the enemies, even against the death balls. You can also freeze these from the sky, they will drop on the ground, and since they will pretty much be stuck in place, you can quickly deal damage onto them and not have them move all over the place, because they can be quite annoying and really hard to take on if you're not managing them properly. The same goes with the war dogs, which is also something that you're going to encounter throughout most of the takedown, so you're going to want to slow these enemies as much as possible so you can take them down. As far as everything else goes, try to bring anything that also immobilizes the enemy, such as for example Amara's phase grasp, which is very good in this context. content, but also anything else that can help you out disengage from the enemy. Most of the arenas over here that you're going to fight into are going to have some covers you can go behind, so try to break the line of sight with the enemy as much as possible, especially since big groups are going to overwhelm you quite quickly. Now, as far as the bosses go, this is going to require special attention, maybe in different videos, since they have different mechanics that are probably harder to explain, but I'm going to go over a quick breakdown of all of them. And there is two main bosses, or well, two main boss encounters in the game, which are of course the Valkyrie Squad, exactly in the middle of the takedown, and finally Wotan, the end boss of this arena, way stronger than anything else in the game. But also there's a third one, or well, a first one, the Kraken. This is kind of like a mini boss that you encounter as soon as you're breaking in the facility. So this is right behind the first walls, and in this location right here, right before entering the facility. You cannot miss this since it's on your path, so this is something that you're going to encounter as fast as possible. But this is actually quite easy to take on, but you do have to be careful to its rockets. It shoots a barrage of missiles that lock on the ground, so just be careful with that. Don't stay in these red circles on the ground. But otherwise, he is going to have a shield, and his shield is going to have a gap that rotates around him, so this is where you will want to throw in all your damage, including of course the grenades, the bullets, the abilities. It's not really that complicated, he just shoots rockets. The best course of action over here is to take down all of the enemies before this boss so that you don't get completely overwhelmed. But there's also going to be some enemies behind the actual hologram over here that are going to shoot into you while you are fighting the Kraken. These are unavoidable unless somebody goes there and kills them, and once you do that you can break in the facility, and from here on is just taking down the enemies. After finishing these enemies off, you're going to reach a spot with an elevator where you're going to be able to replenish all your ammo, and I definitely suggest you doing that, because once you reach the bottom level you're going to encounter the first big boss encounter, which is the Valkyrie Squad. These are 4 Valkyrie robotic enemies that you're going to have to fight, and they're actually pretty damn powerful. But here is the general breakdown of this entire fight. At first you're going to be fighting with all of them at the same time, but once you deal a little bit of damage to one of them, like taking down one of their shields completely, they will go into this immunity phase and they will jump on all of these 4 platforms that surround the main arena. As soon as they do that, there's going to be the first group of enemies that get to spawn in the main section, so try to take these as fast as possible, because as soon as you do that, the first Valkyrie is going to jump into the fight and is going to have its immunity phase down. But otherwise you're going to be fighting from this point on with each Valkyrie one by one. Once it spawns into the arena, you're going to fight with the Valkyrie, bring it down to 40%, it becomes immune and jumps back on its platform, and then another phase of trash enemies are going to spawn, you're going to take them down, the next Valkyrie spawns, and the entire cycle repeats up until the entire Valkyrie squad drops its HP at about 25-30%, somewhere along those lines, to the point where the 4th and the final Valkyrie will jump in, and once you take this down, the entire Valkyrie squad is also going to be pretty much defeated, and congratulations, you pretty much unlocked half of the actual takedown. Now, if your entire party somehow manages to die at this event, you're going to have to restart the entire takedown from the very beginning, because you don't have a respawn point, a save point, or anything of sorts. I'm going to go over that in just a little bit, but if you do defeat the Valkyrie squad, you're going to advance into the next area, which is going to be the second and the last save spot that you're going to have after the initial one in the beginning of the takedown. So be careful with this, because this brings us to the next tip on the list. There's only 2 save locations that you have in the takedown. The first one is in the beginning, and the second one is exactly in the middle of the takedown after finishing off the Valkyrie squad. Unlike any other piece of content in the game, in the takedown you're not going to be able to respawn yourself, so if you die, it's pretty much gone. If you're in fight for your life mode, you can either have a teammate revive you or take revenge upon an enemy, but that is pretty much it. If you fail to do that, you're going to enter a spectate mode and you won't be able to come back unless your teammates clear off the next main boss encounter, which in this case would be either the Valkyrie, either Wotan the Invincible in the end. But the beauty about this is that if you reach the halfway, which is this spot right here after finishing off the Valkyries, if you die on anything after this, you're not going to be brought up to the beginning of the takedown, but rather to the middle of it, since you unlocked the second save point. But that is pretty much it. So plan accordingly and be careful at your teammates, because you're going to have to revive them if you want to take on the end boss. Now, as far as Wotan the Invincible goes, this is the end boss, as I was saying. This probably requires a whole video in itself, since it's a multi-phase boss that brings in a ton of damage. It's also very versatile. It tends to split in half at certain points. But yeah, these are just the tips that I have for now. Of course, once I do these more often, I'm going to break down each individual boss on Mayhem 4, and I might drop separate videos on each boss if there is enough request. But let me know in the comment section down below if I missed anything. In the meantime, don't forget to comment, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.